Hello everyone, I will start the presentation. The author's name is Eugene Lee. The title is a study on building planning elements for modern industrial heritage and revitalization of urban space. The contents are in the following order. First, introduction. Cultural heritages related to industries left in the process of modernization in modern cities are collectively referred to as modern industrial heritages. Numerous modern industrial heritages created through the industrialization process have value to shed light on a series of historical trends such as politics, economy, society, culture of the time. Modern society recognizes the value of modern industrial heritages that remain idle spaces in the city, looks at them from a new perspective, not from the city's hideous objects, and promotes urban regeneration through recycling. Modern industrial heritage has a very wide range, so rather than simply staying in the value of the heritage itself in recycling, it should be viewed in connection with the entire society, economy, and culture of the time. People remember places as traces of memory. An important factor in urban space revitalization is the value of space, and sustainable urban regeneration requires space reactivation to revive the time and place of space and the value of space for the continuous flow of events. This study targets the factory sites of Jeonnam and Ilsin Textile, which are symbols of industrialization in Gwangju and Jeollanam-do. It is a study to preserve historical and cultural values as cultural heritage and to find ways to communicate with cities and modern industrial heritage that have existed disconnected from cities. I would like to focus on architectural space planning element as an alternative to revitalize sustainable urban spaces that can restore the identity of places that have gradually disappeared over time and return modern industrial heritage to nature, cities, and spaces for people. The contents of the study. First, the concept and elements of placelessness are considered as the theoretical background. Second, as a place of communication, the concept of boundary space and the establishment of a relationship based on it are considered. Third, the concept of reduction is applied to the boundary space as a place of communication, and this is proposed as a building planning element. Next, theoretical background. The concepts of place and placelessness. The place is a process of culturalizing the naturally assigned environment. This means that the natural environment itself has the ability to create as a place, so it is a good place for a placelessness as a residence or group and has three linguistic characteristics: physical characteristics, activity, and symbol. Placelessness refers to a state in which a place is given meaning. In other words, the place is not an empty space, but is given meaning by humans to reveal its place. Placelessness constructed around such a place is a perceived characteristic of a place. which refers to a characteristic that humans feel attached to through experience and is unique to one place and at the same time differentiated from other places. Therefore, placeliness can be said to be a collective and social consciousness that members of a specific society have about the place on which they are based in the process of living a collective life. The elements of placeliness. The transition from space to place can be explained by the transition relationship between space as an object and space as an experience. Therefore, it is possible to grasp the perception through human perceptual experience as an important feature in the concept of place. Based on these characteristics, it can be seen that placeliness is created by combining the physical dry environment for building space, human activities in it, and the meaning of time and memory of the place. Components for forming placeliness in architecture include physical elements of site and surrounding situation, integration with nature and cultural elements, differentiation from other places, connection with historical elements, and generation of meaning according to human behavior. Specific targets of physical and environmental factors corresponding to the elements of the formation of a placeliness include natural environment, mathematical occasion, drive environment by human activity, transportation system, and infrastructure, and historical relics are also included. Space is perceived according to its boundaries. Boundary of space limits the space, reflecting the nature of the space, and appears as a result of establishing relationships between different spaces. Boundaries not only block the inside and the outside, but also adjust the relationship through deformation. Coordination by boundaries affects human behavior in space. Within space, boundaries are integrated and separated by structural relationships, including elements and relationships, and adjust the relationship between humans and space and between humans and humans. Dividing a city perceived as one into individual organizations shows that there are many different types of boundaries between them. And the forms of boundaries also appear in various ways in proportion to the diversity of boundaries. Most of the forms of the boundary are physically clear and show strong disconnection. The natural environment is an element of forests, mountains, rivers, or water, and they form a boundary that divides regions in urban spaces. The fortresses that used to form the outskirts of the city, railroads, arterial roads, park, and artificial worlds created after modern times are artificially formed the boundaries. Most of the boundary elements not only limit specific areas in modern cities to cut off exchanges with other areas, but also act as negative factors that hinder hinder the composition of urban spaces. These boundaries of negative factors are objects that must be overcome to restore order in the city. Boundaries in cities can be found mean not only their role as lines or limitations that distinguish the extent of areas, but also in their relationships with those that exist on both sides starting from the boundary. In other words, the city perimeter in the process of forming different each area so they can maintain the independence of the order of the city due to this has been operating system has been set. The boundary in the city should not just separate the two areas, but should be recognized as multiple spaces with characteristics as a medium for establishing a relationship between areas. In other words, the boundary in an urban space is an uncertain place that occur at the point where two different situations collide. In this sense, the boundary is a fence that refers to the territorial limitations of the objects and at the same time becomes a window for communication between two different objects. The boundary in modern space serves as the medium area for communicating space and space. In other words, it can be said that the boundary means the transition from the rule of confrontation and separation between regions to the rule of relational relationship between regions. In space, the boundary area is the part where deformation begins, where different exchanges and differences occur, resulting in the identity between each other due to the non-boundary nature of space and space. The territoriality between spaces is dismantled and concurrency is secured, so it can be said that the relationship in space is converted from an opposing relationship to a complementary relationship. Next, urban regeneration planning elements. The target site of this study is the site of Jeonnam Textile and the Ilsin Textile Factory, located in Imdong, Gwangju. And it is a modern industrial heritage that stopped operating in 2017. There is characterized by being in contact with the nature of Gwangju-cheon stream and the residential area of the city, but there is no connection with the surrounding environment. Reverting to nature and connection to the city. As I came to the modern city, the real relationship between nature and the city changed a lot. Cities that used to create boundaries for protection from nature have gradually expanded their scope and formed new boundaries away from the boundaries of nature. Due to urban development, nature gradually became difficult to find around the city and cities, and nature gradually began to separate. This study avoids the appearance of a modern city separated from nature and cities and attempts to regain the same relationship as before by returning to the appearance where nature and cities coexist together. In the future, nature and cities are not include each other in any one of them and should be connected in equal position. So I suggested that nature and cities should appear in the form of figure 4. Site is liberate and connected to nature and the limit of cities through new boundaries. Area reduced to nature are emptied, and in area connected to cities that propose programs necessary for cities. The elements for building planning, which is applied the concept of communication boundaries and return. Liberting is a dictionary meaning of changing miscellaneous objects or phenomena fundamentally, that is, liberting to their original state. The concept of liberting in this study means returning space, and is a concept for sustainable urban regeneration that restored that place of modern industrial heritage that exists disconnected from the surroundings and connects nature and cities. To this end, an alternative to reset the boundary of the target site is proposed. By resetting boundaries, space is transformed, and this is to reduce the closed and arbitrary space to nature and city and act as a medium for connecting cities, and is proposed as a planning element to break down disconnected boundaries and form open boundaries as communication. In order to reset the boundary, a new boundary must be set. An existing boundary must be deformed, or a new function must be given. Through the combination or deformation of various architectural devices according to the type of boundary. The boundary has the nature of boundary as communication, and the two boundaries are connected and communicated with each other. The method for forming a boundary as communication proposed in this study is as follows. First, in the case of boundaries made through steps, an element called frame is applied to create boundaries as communication. This frame is an architectural planning element that can contain various functions within a frame with the nature of an open boundary. If the existing closed boundary has caused disconnection, the open boundary itself becomes a channel that provides expansion to various functions. This frame space is a device capable of overcoming spatial differences of different levels and may enable natural spatial exchange between the two regions. Second, in the case of a boundary without the step difference, a boundary as communication may be formed in the form of transition space as shown in figure 8. The boundary of new communication has the purpose of connecting cities and nature, nature and nature. Even if the space is of the same nature, if the space is expanded through the setting of new boundary, a transition space is created between the two areas. Through this space, the boundary between the two areas of communication is established to communicate with each other. Third, It transforms various physical boundaries that make up space. This is a planning element that obscures the internal and external boundaries by transforming the physical elements of the building, such as floors, walls, and loops, and enable the boundary space to serve as a place of communication. This study proposes architectural planning elements that can divide the space, change the material of the outer wall, and secure space diversity by removing the outer wall, leaving only the structure, tearing down walls and loops, adding new spaces in space, creating floaty, and adding slabs. Finally, conclusion. This study aims to preserve the history and cultural values of modern industrial heritage and find ways to communicate with cities and propose architectural space planning elements that can be reduced to nature cities and spaces for people. The concept of reverting set as the concept of planning in this study is a concept for sustainable urban regeneration that can restore the place of modern industrial heritage that existed disconnected from the surroundings and connect nature and cities. And this study proposed to reset the boundaries to reduce the existing space. The elements of the building plan for resetting the boundary are summarized as follows. First, in the case of boundaries made through steps, a planning element called frame is applied. This frame is an architectural planning element that can contain various functions within a frame with the nature of an open boundary. Second, in the case of boundary without the step, the boundary of communication that can communicate the two areas with each other is set by expanding the space through the setting of a new boundary called a transition space. Third, it is possible to secure diversity of spaces by blurring internal and external boundaries through deformation of various physical boundaries constituting the space. This study is meaningful as an alternative to revitalizing sustainable urban spaces that can return modern industrial heritage to nature, cities, and spaces for people. Thank you for listening to my presentation.